that I'm now in the lion's den, because I'll be talking to you about a number of things that you possibly do or think or use, which, according to good empirical research, actually don't exist. They're about myths, and I mean, myths, you all know what myths are, and that's what here you have a unicorn, although you shouldn't tell my 5-year-old granddaughter that it's a myth, because for her unicorns are real. And of course, Bigfoot, I could do more, but I'll leave it there. But the question is, are there also myths in education, especially ICT in education? And the answer is, unfortunately, yes. I'll be trying in the next 45 minutes or so to bring you 7 or 8 myths. And the first one is that people can multitask. And you constantly hear it. Let me ruin it for you. People can't multitask. Children can't multitask. Women can't multitask. Actually, one of the questions I get is, but can women do it? No, because women are people. People can't multitask. And yeah, this kind of like says it all. But it's important to know what multitasking actually is, because most people don't know what it is. Multitasking means that you're capable of carrying out 2 thinking or information processing activities, 2 or more, at the same time. And it's important to think about what I'm saying. I'm talking about information processing, that you're actually thinking. And if you can do that, it would happen with no loss of speed, no loss of accuracy. It would be a perfect world. The problem is, the origin of this is in computers with multiple processors. But we as people have only one central processing unit, and it's called our brain. And if I was giving you a lecture now on neuromyths, I would tell you that left brain and right brain don't exist, and it's not so that something happens one place and the other. You can see here that when you're thinking, everything is connected to everything else. And if everything is connected to everything else, you can only do one thing at a time, in any event, if you have to think about it. Let me go back. What this idea of thinking means that if a process is automatized or automated, that you don't have to think about it, you can do 6 or 7 or 8 different things at the same time. I mean, look at Keith Richards playing a guitar, smoking a cigarette, talking to someone else while starting to play Start It Up, which he's played maybe 10, 15,000 times in his career. He's not thinking about it. So he can do it all at the same time. If all of a sudden something goes wrong, or let's say Charlie Watts changes the beat, and he's doing or thinking about something else, he then has to think about playing the guitar, and things go wrong. What we actually do is we switch tasks. We switch between 2 or more activities. And if this thing works, yeah. I mean, what happens is this. You start on a task. Okay? Doesn't matter what. Let's say you're setting up a lesson for tomorrow. Okay? And you start on that task and you're working on it. And all of a sudden an email comes. Yeah? And you weren't smart enough to turn off all of the things that pop up on your screen. So you see that an email comes in and you see that it's from Theo. You think, oh, that's going to be important. So you stop. And at that point, you pay a switching penalty. Why do you pay a switching penalty? Very simple. You were thinking about something else. You're busy in the cognitive scheme in your old head. Okay? And all of a sudden, you go and you have an email from that email. Yeah, I can't do anything about it. This is Ed Media. Okay? Yeah? Going to plug in another one. Okay. You start to read. Press the wrong button, which is because I was multitasking. Yeah. Okay, now I can walk. Now I have one thing in one hand, one thing in the other. It's going to go wrong a number of times. I can guarantee it. Okay? The thing comes in, and you have to switch to a new schema. It's about what's going on at the conference today. And Theo says that somebody decided A or B or C, and you give an answer. And you send an email back. Okay? And so you do that, you send an email back, and you have to go then back to your first task, which means you have to leave the old scheme and go back to the new scheme, right? Sounds simple. But what happened here? You had switched schemas, and you weren't really in it. And in that thing, Theo told you that something was changed. And you want to send Theo an email and say to Theo, that's really stupid what Mr. or Mrs. X, Y, or Z has decided. But instead of sending it to Theo, you send it to reply all. Why? Because you're not there with your thoughts. And I know a lot of you have probably done that. Yeah? So you go back to the first one, and then again the same thing happens. So what you do is you continually restart a process. Those are called reinstatement searches. And because you have to switch constantly between the schemas, it makes it slower, and you make mistakes. And what are the consequences of this? First, that it takes longer to study. There was a beautiful piece of research done in which students were asked to piece of text to mastery. Small piece of text. And it took 5 minutes on average to read it to mastery. They then, in another group, and they did this crossing and everything like it should be done, they sent them every once in a while a text message while they were reading. And to learn to mastery now, it took 8 to 9 minutes. That's 1.6 to 1.8 times as much time. So let nobody tell you that if you're doing 2 or 3 things at the same time, you can't learn it to mastery. You can. But you have to be willing to invest the extra time. And we're not talking about a small text of 5 minutes. We're talking about a chapter in a book, which may take an hour or 2. So you have to be willing to spend 3.5 to 4 hours studying it if you're constantly being bombarded with information. And the problem is, that doesn't happen. So in a piece of research that I did, we found out that those people who were continually multitasking while they were studying tended to have lower grades. If you're talking about the American system of A, B, C, D, we're talking about a half a grade lower, average. If we're talking about the Dutch system, which is on 10 points, we're talking about 1.5 points out of 10 lower. So in American terms, if you would normally get a 90, you would get, which is based on 10 or 100, you would get an 80, 75, 80, 85 on the test. But if you normally got a 65, so you were just passing, you'd end up failing. You're now going to give me another microphone. Okay. Is this better? Why didn't anyone say that? Come on. So you tend to get lower grades, okay? What also is the case is you tend to miss important things. There was a great piece of research done on driving in which one group of drivers, it was a simulator, a really good simulator, you know, not like computer screen with a simulator, kind of like the same thing you would have in a Boeing 737 if they did that with 737 MAXs, which they don't do, and that's why they tend to end up in the ground. But, they had 3 groups of people. One was driving. One was getting a telephone call every once in a while. Nothing big, just a telephone call. And one group was legally drunk. And what they found is that the only group that tended to have accidents was the people who were on the telephone. They were also slower to brake, slower to get back to traffic. That led to, if you think of it properly, if you're going 130 kilometers an hour, and you see the difference in braking time, it's about 32 meters, which is about 8 car lengths later that you actually brake. But the most important thing about that was that they asked them afterwards, what color jacket did that girl have who walked out between the two cars? And the people who were just driving said red. And the people who were drunk said red. And the people who were talking on the telephone said, what girl? It's not where your hands are. It's not about driving hands-free or not. It's about where your thoughts are while you're driving. There's also a loss of concentration. Ophir and Nass did a piece of research. They asked multitaskers and non-multitaskers to do a simple thing. Look at a screen where there were blue rectangles. And every once in a while, a red rectangle would enter. And the only thing they had to do was concentrate on the blue rectangles. The people who constantly multitasked and said that they were serial multitaskers, they were not capable of ignoring the irrelevant red blocks. And I won't go into this because I'm not a social psychologist, but you also see classical addiction phenomena. So don't. What if you're making education, if you're an instructional designer or a teacher? Don't allow switching and encourage switching. Don't listen to people who say that kids are digital natives or whatever and are capable of doing it. They can't. No human being can. So encourage monotasking. And let kids experience the difference themselves. Let them experience that they learn worse. Don't take it for granted that they'll know it themselves. They won't. Okay? Second, taking notes. I don't know how many of you here are teachers or instructors or professors or whatever giving lessons. Okay? Good, thank you. A lot of you. I would assume if you walked into the class and you said to the kids, if they're in any event high school or college students, close your laptops, get out a pen and a piece of paper, you would get all different types of complaints. Yeah? But the problem is taking notes on laptops is a problem. Because learning depends on information processing. If you don't process information, you don't learn. It's kind of like if you're not listening to the teacher or instructor and you're reading the newspaper, you probably won't learn what the teacher is saying. Okay? So if you don't process, you don't learn. If you process things just on the surface, you'll only learn them at best superficially. If you do it deeply, you'll learn deeply. And if you do it more often, you'll be able to remember it and retrieve it better. Very simple. It's not rocket science. That's the way our brains work. There's been quite a lot of research on this, and the research was such that they had students taking notes on their laptops or with pen and paper or pencil and paper. And what they found is directly after the lesson, so you're done, I now give you a pop quiz. If you took notes by hand, you scored better. But then they said, okay, we'll give you a week the time, and you can look at your notes that you either made with a laptop or pen and paper, and we'll give you another exam. And in that exam, the exact same thing happened. And why? Why was taking notes with the hand better? Most students, most kids today can type as fast as I can talk, which means it goes in their ears and out their fingers. Think about a court stenographer. They don't know what they're typing. They're just typing what they're hearing. They don't process the information. And so if you don't process the information, you learn nothing or very superficially. It's just that simple. But if you're taking notes with pen and paper, and judging on the age of the people here, I don't think any of you or very few of you took steno somewhere. You're probably not capable of writing as fast as I can talk, which means you have to choose the main points. You have to paraphrase what I'm saying. You have to summarize the things. So that means at the end of the lesson, you've actually processed the information. You've learned. And if you do it a week later, the people who just typed it are seeing it for the first time. They're seeing exactly what I said. They're not, if they're doing it well, they're looking to see what are the main points, but probably just reading it and rereading it. And the people who took it with pen and paper, they're looking at it and they're saying, oh yeah, and how did he actually say that? And why? And what was it? What were his actual words? So they're processing it a second time, and not the first time, and processing it more deeply. They learn better. So don't allow note-taking on a laptop or any other device. And I know the kids will say, well, I need it because I want it electronically and I want to send it. You say, well, take $60 or $80, euros or whatever, and buy a smart pen. And you can write with the hand with your smart pen. You can plug it in, and you have your notes that you've taken, and you can share them with others, annotate your own notes, or whatever. But don't take for granted, if you do that first thing, don't take for granted that kids can take notes, that they can summarize, that they can outline, and that they can study. We did a great piece of research at the Open University in which we were doing the difference between retrieval practice, so testing, and rereading. And we thought the best way to do retrieval practice would be to have students make a summary of what they read, because they have to bring it out of their long-term memory, write it down, rewrite it, think about it, all of those types of things. And what did we find? We found that they didn't learn better. And so I said to Kim, take a look at the summaries that they wrote. And they were horrible. So if you want your students to do something like summarize, like paraphrase, like take notes, make outlines, you also have to make sure they know how to do that. And that's not something that you leave to the English teacher or Chinese teacher or whatever the native language teacher is, which is normal. Do it in all courses. Third, take a look at what the person left and the girl in the middle are doing and the person all the way on the right. In research, and I know it's always a killer when you say it in research, but research found that 40 to 80% of people who are busy on their laptops during a lesson are busy with something other than the lesson. And how do they do that? They have someone sitting up there in the balcony with binoculars, and they're checking out what are on people's screens while they're there. They don't know it's happening unobtrusively. 40 to 80%. One teacher did a really great experiment, an N is 1 experiment, in which she asked all of the students to take their telephones out of their jackets or purses or whatever, put it on the desk, and put the ringtone as hard, the volume as hard as it can, as loud as it can. Yeah? They weren't allowed to use them. And they found out that in one lesson, this happened. This is what it looked like. Someone was in the front doing this. In one 45-minute period. And remember, this is an underestimation, because the person sitting there was not capable of sending a text message to Theo saying, boy, that guy really hates media. So it's only what happened from outside. This is what happened in one class of 30 students. And I know it's self-report, but 40% of students in a classroom say that they're distracted by other people's devices. You're sitting there, and all of a sudden you see a flickering screen next to you, and your attention is there. If you're attending to something else, you're not more listening to me or the person or whatever anymore. Okay? But it's not only what I'm saying here, it's self-report. These are the results of it. If you're multitasking yourself, and I'll use the word multitasking, though I should use the word task switching, yeah? You see that those who are task switching, multitasking, and not multitasking, that there's a significant difference in how much they remembered, they learned in the lesson. But this thing on the right, those who could view multitasking scored significantly lower than those who couldn't view it. So going back to that first picture, the person all the way on the right is the person with no view multitasking, and the girl in the middle had a view of multitasking. And this is what happened. So please, don't allow mobile devices to be used unless they're really necessary. And please don't cave in to parents and the children that find that the kids should use them. But do create time, space to make use of it where necessary. No, I'm not a Luddite. I don't hate new media. But use it when you should use it, when it's necessary. If I've given a lecture on Newtonian forces, and I've done that for 5 or 10 minutes, and I give it with really nice writing on the board or PowerPoints or whatever, and I say, okay, now open your laptops and go to that simulation in which we're going to see the difference between an elastic and a non-elastic collision. It's great. But there's no reason to have it open while I'm talking and explaining the theory. So this is usually my second slide when I give a lecture at a university. And if someone doesn't want to do that, I say it's my way or the highway. You don't have to be here. I'm not taking attendance. If you're going to sit here and work with your tablet or your computer, there's the door. Because I really don't give a darn if you don't learn. But it's really a drag for the person next to you. Now, reading is reading. In the Netherlands, every year we hear the same thing. Kids have to go to school with like 10 kilos of books on their back. I don't know why. They don't use those books every day at home for homework. They could just leave it in a locker. But okay. And so let's do it all on a screen, on an e-reader, on a tablet, on a computer screen. It's the same, right? I'm not going to read all of this to you, but the answer is no. It's not the same. People read faster. They think that they've learned it or learned it better. They learn the gist just as well as those who read it from a paper. But for the actual content, the facts, reading from a physical piece of paper or a book works better than reading from a reader, a tablet, or a screen. And a lot of the reason for that is because reading from a book gives you kind of like a roadmap to where you are. You see it where it is on the page. When you're trying to remember it, you remember where it was on the page. The physical, I didn't think of this myself, yeah? They said the reason is that it allows you to create, as it were, a map, a diagram of where it is, which helps you to remember it better. So, what shouldn't you do? Well, that's pretty simple. What you should do is, if it's necessary, if it's only electronic, print it for them and give it to them. And also have your schools make use of open educational resources. The State University of New York system has now, with Lumen Learning, decided that all of the college books for all of the courses at the State University of New York will be open educational resources and veritably free for the students. And research shows that a lot of students at universities don't buy the books because they're too expensive. So please, encourage open educational resources. Now, this one, by the way, that's my granddaughter Elsa when she was really small. That's her with her mother in the iPad. And every once in a while, I get a new email or a WhatsApp from my daughter saying, do you need a new picture of a digital native? So I actually could have the one with her brother Benjamin, who's now 2 years old. This idea of digital natives, that's from 2001. That was Mark Prensky. A digital native was born in 1984 or later. That means a lot of you are digital natives here. Yeah? The idea from Prensky was he saw children playing with telephones or whatever, and they seemed to be able to do 2 or more things at the same time. He never, ever, ever did a piece of research on it, but he published 2 articles. The first one is that children are digital natives and think differently. Think differently. In a half a generation, their brains changed. While in the previous 10 to 15,000 years, they didn't. But apparently, they changed. And he said, those are digital natives. They learn differently. They read differently. So we should change our education. And the problem is, on the other side, that you have these digital immigrants. It was the second paper that he wrote in 2001. And that's us. That's me. Although I probably use a computer more than whatever child you could think of at the moment. Okay? Then we had, in the Netherlands, this guy named Wim Veen. And he came up with the term Homo sapiens. And he said, because these children have never been exposed to anything but a digital world, they're all of a sudden capable of I'll read, this is a direct quote, independently, playfully, and without instruction, have developed all of these metacognitive skills. It's kind of like saying, I've never lived in an age where there wasn't a car, and because of that, I'm a Formula One driver. Magically, hocus pocus pos, I can do this because I was born at a certain time. I have another term for them, and not Homo sapiens or digital natives. I call them ADHDers, attention deficit hyperlink disorder. That was called by Gaby Solomon, may he rest in peace, the butterfly defect, in which he said, what happens is that kids, like a butterfly, flutter from one interesting piece of information, hyperlink, to another, without ever understanding the structure of what they're reading, and at the end, ending up with a lot of maybe interesting facts, but not learning what it's about. That's what we're building at the moment. So, please don't be fooled. And I know it's going to hurt, and I know that a year or two ago, Sugata Mitra, I think, was one of the, was he ever a keynote speaker here? Don't believe that eduquack. Yeah? Sugata Mitra is an incredibly good solid-state physicist. He knows squat about education. That's called, or I coined the phrase, it's called the expertise generalization syndrome. Someone who knows a lot about one area thinks he or she knows quite a lot about another area, tells it to people, and expects to be believed. Sir Ken Robinson is a really good theater expert. He's a dramatist. That's where he has his degree in. He has no idea how people learn. Elon Musk, who yells, "You don't need a college education, look at me." He's the one in a million that can do that. Don't be fooled by eduquacks. Don't be fooled by people who have the expertise generalization syndrome. And please, before using one of the techniques, and go back to what the Homo sapiens all were capable of doing, check whether they can do it, and if they can't, help them to learn to do it before letting them loose. It's kind of like, okay, look at that way to climb the side of a mountain. Okay, you understand it. Without any safety ropes, go do it. That's what that type of education is. Another one, knowledge is as perishable as fresh fish. If you were a Dutch audience, I tell you where that phrase came from, and you'd understand it. It doesn't matter. But the fact is, that's not the case. Almost all of what you learned still is relevant. It hasn't gone away. There's been an enormous increase in the amount of information and in available sources. But that doesn't mean that what you learned in the past is wrong. It's not that there's a half-life that's constantly decreasing. If that was the case, I would remember about 0.5% of that which I learned when I was a child. And sorry, the Pythagorean theorem, elastic collisions, all of those things are still the case. They're not wrong because we're in 2019. And actually, that old is needed to understand the new. And not only to understand it, but also to judge it. I'll give you an example. I have no idea what time it is, but it doesn't matter. There was an interview in a Dutch quality newspaper about 2 years ago with two dietitians who wrote in the newspaper, or actually were quoted in the newspaper as saying that eggs are really bad for you. And the reason was because eggs are the menstruation of chickens. These are dietitians with a degree. So if you know nothing, you could actually think they're right. And if you know anything about chickens, you know that they have a cloaca and it is kind of similar to et cetera, et cetera. So you could say, but there's only one problem with that. If you took elementary biology and you remembered anything of it, which means that you actually thought about it when you got it, you know that there's only one type of animal that's capable of menstruating, and that's a mammal. And the last time I looked, chickens weren't mammals. That information, that knowledge that you have is necessary to judge whether or not what you read on the internet is actually the case or not, if it's reliable or valid. And then, of course, the other one, Sugata Mitra again, you don't have to learn any facts anymore because it's all on the web. Just Google it. Yeah, it's all on the web, but how do you choose between those many unreliable sources? How do you read it and understand it if you have no knowledge? Is anybody here a quantum physicist? No. Then I challenge you, if Sugata Mitra is right, to read an article from the Journal of Quantum Physics or Chemistry and tell me whether you understand it. Because according to Sugata Mitra, you don't have to, because you can look it up on the internet. I have no idea if you have a week or two to spend before actually being able to understand that article, but that's about how long it would take you. Otherwise, you get articles or papers by your students who are asked to write a paper on Sir Francis Bacon, the 16th century natural philosopher, and who end up writing papers on Sir Francis Bacon without knowledge of what a natural philosopher is, what the 16th century means. And you can laugh about it, but if you asked a group of kids, 15, 16, 17-year-olds at the moment, what year did the 16th century begin and when did it end? I think about half of them would not be able to tell you that it began in 1500 and ended in 1599. So, please don't assume that kids can do this. Teach kids how to search properly, evaluate, and give feedback to them on what they've done. And that's important. At the moment, you see they give courses in it, free of content. But how are you going to do it without content? Without knowing something, you can't judge the reliability or the validity. And if it's taught in context, it's usually done in a course in your mother language. But you need it for every course. So use it, integrate it in every course. And as a teacher, don't only look at what the student has written, but follow the process too. Find out why they cut and pasted something that they didn't really understand, and help them learn to do it. And finally, the last one, it's ed media. That media really make a difference. And this is a camera or a projector, and this is a movie projector. I had to make sure I was pressing the right button. And this is a laser disc, which the Open University pioneered in the 1980s. And is that choosing those really makes a difference. And there are a lot of people who believe that. The top one is about the phonograph. I'm not going to read it for you because cognitive load theory says that if I read it for you, you'll remember it more poorly. So just read it. But the top one, all three of them are from Thomas Edison. The last one was from 1922. In 2019, if you just take the word motion picture out of it and put in the word computer, you'll see the exact same quote. But that's not the case. And we know that for years. Two Dutch scientists, Revesz and Hazewinkel, published in 1923 this article. First in Dutch and then in English. And this is what they found. And then Gunning in 1925 wrote the thing underneath it. Dick Clark, one of my idols, wrote an article in, I'll let you read in a second, it's in the wrong order, in 1983, Reconsidering Research on Learning from Media. And this is the way he began the article. It's not the grocery truck that lets you eat better. It's the content. And what he found in this article, and his major conclusion in this article, was that in all of the research that he studied, or in most of it, let's put it that way, they confused the medium with the method. So it wasn't that, you know, in good educational research or any research at all, you keep the two groups the same, and the only thing you do is you change the intervention. Okay? That means if I'm talking about a television lecture versus a face-to-face lecture, and I want to compare them, they have to be the exact same. The only difference is the medium. That means if I'm standing in a lecture hall and I have to make use of a whiteboard or a chalkboard to make my point, but in the television version, they cut away to a simulation or an animation. They're not the same. The method is different. And if the method is different, you can't say if the medium is better or not. In 2006, he wrote a chapter along with Dave Feldman, Dick Clark and Dave Feldman. And he noted 10 dubious reasons for you to use multimedia. And I'm not going to read them to you, but many of the things you've heard. Learn better from it. It's more motivating. It uses agents, and that supports learning. Yeah? Learners can direct their own learning. It's constructivistic. Yeah? It leads to higher order thinking skills. It leads to more interactivity. It can in certain situations. But it's not the medium that does that. It's the method. My takeaways for today, before going over to one unholy trinity and two holy trinities in this Kupel church. So I thought we'll have holy and unholy trinities. The medium isn't the message. Was it George Bush who said, it's the economy, stupid? Yeah? It's the method, stupid, not the medium. And a medium is no more than a tool. And used properly, you can make beautiful things with tools. If used poorly, you can really make crap. Yeah? So, first, my own holy trinity. The first is myths. If you hear something and it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. If you hear that something works better for something called a digital generation or whatever, it probably doesn't. There's nothing backing it. So first, watch out for myths. The second is watch out for gurus and eduquacks. Try to find the original research on it. Not because someone says it, not because someone's wearing a white lab coat. I mean, if you look at the original advertisements for cigarettes in the United States in the 50s, you had a doctor in a white lab coat saying that Salem mentholated was better, was good for you. Okay? And please, stop with the anecdotes. If I talk about learning styles to a teacher or a parent, they're constantly saying, yeah, but my kid or in my class. And I usually ask them, do you have a second anecdote? And I can call it data. Anecdotes are worthless. My first holy trinity in education. If you're doing something in education, if you're changing your teaching, if you're changing the way you're presenting something, make sure that what you're doing is at least as effective, if not more effective, than what you had. And by effective, I mean that they learn what they should learn, and if you're making it more effective, that they learn it more deeply. Efficient. That means they learn it more quickly, or that it costs less mental effort, cognitive load, so that they're then capable of having that extra space in the working memory to learn more deeply. So that's what it makes it enjoyable. Please, that doesn't mean it's fun, because learning usually isn't fun. And getting really good at something is really not fun. It's a lot of heavy lifting work to do it. But what I mean by enjoyable is that it feels good, that you have a feeling of success, of accomplishment, that at the end of a lesson you can do more than at the beginning of a lesson. Because in contrast to what some people say, and a lot of people believe, motivation doesn't lead to learning. Learning leads to motivation. It's great to have motivation, to start on something. But if you constantly hit your head against the wall, because by trial and error you do it wrong, and you get the wrong answers, and you get the idea you can't do it, the motivation stops quickly. If you start doing something, it doesn't matter how small the step is, and you experience success, it motivates you to continue. And there was a really large Canadian study which showed this to be the case. The second Holy Trinity. As a teacher, every teacher should have a deep conceptual knowledge and skills met the tools of his or her trade. A computer, whiteboard, a book, a lecture, whatever. Those are the tools of the trade. Knowing what they are, when to use them, when not to use them, and how to use them is incredibly important for any craftsman or woman. The same thing is for the techniques. Technique is collaborative learning is a technique. Problem-based learning is a technique. Direct instruction is a technique. You need to have a deep conceptual knowledge and skills with the different techniques that you can use. And then with the ingredients are dual. One ingredient, part of the ingredients, is the content knowledge of the area. It's really hard to teach chemistry or history if you don't know very much about it. That's one of the ingredients. So a deep conceptual knowledge and skills in chemistry, English, history, or whatever. But the other ingredients are things like the use of questions. One of the major problems with collaborative learning is that it doesn't work. Although I was a professor of collaborative learning. Yeah? And the reason why it doesn't work is because when you collaborate with others to learn, there are extra costs involved. We call them transaction costs. Those are coordination costs and communication costs. If you're working with someone else, you have to coordinate your actions. You have to communicate with them. If the task is not complex enough that the benefits of collaborating are greater than the costs of that collaboration, the students won't collaborate with each other and won't learn from it. And that's why I call it an ingredient, because if you want to implement collaborative learning in your class, you also have to know how to create complex problems in which working together is more beneficial, gives more profit than the costs involved in working together. If they don't, they won't. And it's the same thing and I used to be a cook. That's something that, yeah, I'm done. Great. I used to be a cook in a restaurant. That's how I met my wife. I was a cook. She was a client. The way to a woman's heart is through her stomach, apparently. A top 3-star Michelin chef is a master of the tools, techniques, and ingredients of good cooking, and can make delicious, nutritious, and good-looking meals. And it doesn't matter if someone comes into the restaurant and has some type of allergy, or it's a birthday party or whatever, he or she is capable at the drop of a dime to change things and do things to make a good meal, because he or she is a master of the tools, techniques, and ingredients. The same thing is true for a teacher. A teacher who masters the tools, techniques, and ingredients is a 3-star Michelin teacher. If not, that person is a snack bar owner. A lot of the things that I've talked to you about today are on my English language blog. I have an English and a Dutch language blog. So if you go to 3-star learning experiences, And now you understand why it's called 3-star instead of 5-star, because I love to cook. Yeah? You can read it. And if you want to hear about more urban myths, you can, this is our first book. Theo was talking about it, Urban Myths About Learning and Education. And in the fall, a second book is coming, and we don't have a title yet, and we don't have a cover to show you, although I contacted the publisher 3 times in the last 2 weeks to say, I'm going to be at Ed Media. Give me a mock-up of the cover with a title. But he didn't. Okay? So hopefully, I've been in the lion's den, and I hope, just like Daniel, that as I try to leave here today, you're not going to maul me and eat me alive. That's it.